Surrounded by a lot of members of the community here. I'm Dave Morris from the Oklahoman alongside Ben Felder from the Oklahoman. We're outside the south steps of the Oklahoma State Capitol. A teacher rally in progress, expecting to hear people on the stage here shortly. Currently we're surrounded by a whole lot of people. Lots of signs, lots of people, pretty upbeat so far. We've heard a few chants, Ben. We've heard a lot of radio.
Yeah, it's a festive atmosphere. I think when you talk to a lot of teachers, their rage and frustration is apparent, but also kind of in high spirits. I think, you know, when you think about what educators have been advocating for over the last few years, you know, we saw a rally in 2014. We saw teachers run for office a couple of years ago, and the state question attempt to sales tax to fund teacher pay. You know, teachers have been doing a lot to advocate for their profession, and I think there's a lot of pride when you talk to a lot of them here today that they not proud that that it's come to this moment or it had to result in a walkout like this, but I think they feel pride that they're doing something more. And for a lot of teachers, they say, hey, a walkout is kind of the final step, but it was time to deploy that. So yeah, a very festive atmosphere, but still a lot of frustration you know, when you talk to teachers and definitely when you read their signs.
The crowd count coming into this afternoon or this morning's rally was estimated to be several thousand, perhaps up to 30,000. Buses are still coming in. People are still walking up from the neighborhoods with their signs and with their cups of coffee. You've been here since the crack of dawn. If you're watching this later on demand, this is about 10 in the morning as we record this. You got here early. You saw State Superintendent Joy Hoffmeister. What'd she have to say?
Yeah, well, she said that she thought she was optimistic that today's rally and how many days it lasts will result in some type of change. She praised the legislature for what they did last week to fund an average of a $6,000 teacher pay raise across the state, a little bit more funding for textbooks. You know, with an $18 million increase for school budgets, you know, just kind of a drop in the bucket when you talk to a lot of teachers when you think about the hundreds of millions that have been cut. But she said, hey, this is about teachers sharing their voice, but she was optimistic, or at least she sounded that way, that lawmakers were going to respond in some way. Now, whether that was going to happen today or tomorrow or later this week, she wasn't sure. She didn't know what kind of revenue-raising package lawmakers may consider. But yeah, talking to her this morning, she said, hey, this is what you're seeing today is the frustration that teachers have had for years, and they're speaking up.
Currently, there are people on the stage. We're not going to toss to them just yet, but they're encouraging people here to go into the Capitol and talk to their legislatures.
Yeah, many had signed up in advance. Early this morning, teachers were already lined up to go inside to the Capitol. I just was inside. There are quite a bit already in there. And once again, it's about, you know, what is the legislature willing to do? Teachers said that last week's legislation wasn't enough. Many recognized that it was quite a bit, but still wasn't enough. And it was quite a bit. It was historic in the sense that this is a tax-adverse state and a legislature that has not increased taxes since the supermajority threshold was put in place. So it was a big lift for lawmakers. Teachers are saying, hey, they need to lift even bigger. After last week's tax increases on oil and gas production, on cigarettes and motor fuel, teachers say, hey, there's still some other options, whether that means getting rid of the capital gains deduction, ball and dice gaming at casinos. There have been lots of proposals over the last couple months, and teachers are saying, hey, consider some of these proposals. But what we see out of the legislature in terms of votes, we'll just have to wait and see.
You also heard from interim Oklahoma City Schools superintendent this morning as well.
Yeah, she's interim superintendent for, I think, what about the last month? I mentioned to her, Aurora Laura, the previous superintendent, she had to cut $40 million from her budget in her first couple of weeks. Rebecca Kay, the interim superintendent, having to manage a walkout in her district in her first few weeks. And she said that, hey, this wasn't what I expected, definitely when I took the job. But she paused and said, you know what? I am kind of also reflecting on the historic moment that we're underway right now. I mean, this is not just a big day for public education, it's a big day for the state. I mean, if we reach those crowds of 30,000 people, I mean, that's going to be the biggest demonstration that the state capitol has ever seen. And so she said that, hey, I'm focused on how do we manage this walkout, how do we still care for our students. The Oklahoma City Public Schools, as well as a lot of other districts, are doing having some feeding sites across the city to ensure that a lot of these students that rely on the free breakfast and lunch are still being fed today. You know, that'll continue tomorrow and the rest of this week. A lot of teachers say they're not going anywhere until the legislature acts.
I'm Dave Morris alongside Ben Felder. We're right outside the Oklahoma State Capitol. This rally actually hasn't started yet, although there's a lot of people here rallying. On the stage, there's a whole bunch of shout-outs. Hey, where's Owasso? Where's Moore? So we'll go to the stage once there's some actual speeches going. Right now, they toss back to the radio. You mentioned Aurora Laura. Several people weighed in on Facebook yesterday. Aurora Laura was one of those as well, posting that, hey, she supported the Oklahoma teachers, gave them her support. She was actually also interviewing for other jobs. Alicia Priest posted something on Facebook as well.
Yeah, she said, like I just added, the teachers are going to be here until the legislature acts. After last week's vote, there was kind of a pause, and some teachers were saying, okay, does this end the walkout? In fact, a lot of lawmakers kind of had thought that's what they had done, that with their package that they had inverted the shutdown. Within a few hours, it seemed like, okay, Monday looks like it's still going to happen if for no other reason than logistically everything's been planned. But within a day, teachers across the state were saying, no, this is not enough. And so a lot of schools, over nearly 200 schools, have closed down today. Many have said they're prepared to close for the rest of the week. I believe Mustang and some other districts have already said, Owasso have already said that they're closed, at least for the next few days. I saw a group of teachers over here that actually had a tent. Now, they were informed by Capitol Security that they wouldn't be allowed to stay over the night, so they said, well, we'll bring the tent back again the next morning. But so when you talk to a lot of teachers, at least here in the early hours of this walkout, they're looking at it as day one of as many as it takes.
It'll be interesting to see what the duration of this is. Again, Dave Morris alongside Ben Felder here at the Oklahoma State Capitol. We're surrounded by a ton of people and a whole bunch of signs, pretty creative signs. If nothing else, it's entertaining just to do some reading of the interesting things that have come up.
Yeah, teachers are a creative bunch, and that's obviously displayed in a lot of these signs. And the signs are an interesting thing because I've covered lots of rallies at the Capitol. This looks like it's probably going to be the biggest, if not one, or at least one of the biggest. And sometimes you come out here and a rally that's being kind of hosted by a group, they all have the same sign. So that organization may distribute the same signs or ask people to write on the sign with their logo. What you see here, and I'm sure this was intentional, what you see here is homemade signs. I mean, yes, the Oklahoma Education Association has led the charge for this walkout, and they've definitely been in a leadership role, and they're kind of the central figures that we are looking at. But they've really kind of let this be a teacher-driven thing. In fact, last week on the Political State show at News OK, we were kind of talking about maybe some of the potential communication missteps that some people have felt like OEA has gone through, and how maybe that's, maybe there has been some communication missteps, but maybe that's also because the OEA has, at every turn, has seemed to kind of pause and let teachers say what they want to do. I mean, after the legislature voted last week to increase teacher pay, the OEA was pretty unclear about whether or not today would happen. Within a day, when educators had responded and said, yeah, we're going to be at the Capitol and we're going to be out there advocating for more, then OEA said, yep, we'll be there. So what you're seeing here, a lot of individuality, a lot of creativity, yeah.
You mentioned the Political State Podcast. Every Friday, Ben Felder hosts a Political State Podcast. It's a video and audio show from the Oklahoman's Video Studios. On Friday, Amber England, a consultant with OEA, I believe, was in studio with you and Justin Wingeter, and she kind of outlined the things you just mentioned, but it was a decent 33-minute conversation, kind of how did we get here and the behind the scenes of the thinking.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to realize that when you say how did we get here, teachers didn't just wake up one morning, last week and say this is what they wanted to do. I mean, we've been talking about education struggles for years. You go back over the last decade, education funding's been cut by almost 10%. Some reports show it at nearly 28% when you adjust for inflation. Emergency certified teachers, when school districts can't find a traditionally certified and trained teacher, they can appeal for an emergency certified teacher. There were nearly 2,000 of those across the state, when 5 years ago there was less than 35. Principals will tell you that when it comes to hiring for some positions, especially in our rural communities, when they once had dozens of applications come in for a job posting, now they have none. Teachers have been moving to neighboring states for higher pay, and it's not just that other states offer more pay, it's that other districts in those states offer. I mean, I've heard stories of teachers that have gone to North Texas and have gotten an instant raise of $20,000 or more. And if you're a married couple where both of you are teachers, and that's not uncommon, and you go to a district like you've seen in North Texas or Northwest Arkansas, and you each are making $20,000, $25,000 more, that's a pretty substantial increase in pay. And so this has been something that's been bubbling for a long time. And like I said earlier, we saw the rally of 2014. We saw what was called the Teachers Caucus a couple years ago, where dozens of educators ran for state office. The statewide question to increase the sales tax to fund for teacher pay, that was unsuccessful. But there's been a lot of efforts. Teachers who have been advocating have done a lot of things to try to advocate for their position. And once again, a walkout like this was seen as kind of the last step, but now a necessary step when you talk to many educators.
Well, and a pretty significant step. Let me ask you this about teachers running for office. Are you still hearing that for 2020?
Well, there are a few. We haven't heard quite as many. And in fact, our colleague at the Oklahoman, Chris Castile, had wrote recently that the number of candidates in general has kind of gone down for the last couple of years. And maybe that's a reflection of voter apathy or frustration. We're still several months away from election, but this is a time when serious campaigns are already up and running. But what's interesting is I haven't heard a lot of talk about elections because once again, the elections are in November, they're several months away. Teachers are focused right now on this legislative session. Now, there are quite a bit of signs out here that point to the elections.
There is the vote them out.
There are chants to vote them out. There are a lot of signs that target Governor Mary Fallin. Now, she's at term limits, so this is the end of her term in office, one way or the other, or will be. So there will be an election for a new governor. I've seen a couple of candidates actually that have booth here, taking advantage of the situation. But elections are going to be an important part of whatever happens this week because these lawmakers, for most of them, they're facing re-election back home. And for many Republican lawmakers last week, the vote to increase taxes was a tough vote. I mean, and now they have to go back and defend that vote in some of the most conservative parts of the country. And so now teachers are asking them to do even more, to raise even more taxes. And a lot of those lawmakers will say, I just can't do it. But educators are here to put the pressure on them and to force their hand.
Things are getting serious when Bon Jovi starts coming through the speakers. Tim Money behind the camera is all about it. We got Todd Frazier over here, Paige Dillard back at the control room at the Oklahoman. Dave Morris alongside Ben Felder. Greg Singleton's out here talking with teachers. And perhaps this is a good segue of our coverage this morning. You also have Darla Slipke out here talking with teachers.
Yeah, we've got a team of reporters. Darla's here at the Capitol. Of course, we've got Dale, our Capitol reporter inside, tracking any movement in the legislature. We've got reporters across the city. I know Tim Willard was with Oklahoma City teachers who had marched this morning from a nearby school to the Capitol. We've got some reporters out at some of the feeding sites across the city where students are getting meals that they rely on at school.
And let's talk about that for a second. If all the teachers are here, where are the students? What happens with them? What have we learned about that?
Well, where the students are kind of depends on the household. I know for my child, he's in daycare, and for other families that may be of means, it's just a matter of signing them up for daycare or a camp. There are a lot of places across the city, like the Science Museum and the zoo, that are offering some kind of drop-in activities and camps. I know the Children's Theater is doing some things, but for a lot of families, they're kind of in a tough spot. They may have to take off work and stay home with their kids. Maybe their kids have to stay home by themselves, but that's why it's important when we talk about things like breakfast and lunch and dinner. So many of our students in Oklahoma rely on those free meals. And when schools were going to close, that was one of the first things they said is, hey, we need to make sure that we're still providing those meals. So Oklahoma City schools, as well as a lot of other districts, are either opening up their cafeterias today or they're doing mobile feeding sites. Oklahoma City has buses delivering meals across the city to ensure that those students are still getting that. Some organizations have been offering tutoring and some kind of makeshift classes. In fact, here at the rally, there's an AP English class with desks and a whiteboard and everything, so even high schoolers that are here don't have to miss out on some important lessons.
Class was in session early this morning. That was one of the first things that was set up here.
Yeah, they were setting up tables and chairs and a whiteboard, and I was walking by and they said, "Hey, class starts at 9 a.m." and I kind of laughed, like, "No, seriously, we're gonna have an AP English class here at 9 a.m." So teachers teach. That's what they do, and there are some already doing it. On the other side of the Capitol, there are a group of band directors from across the state that had put together a makeshift band. So there's still some teaching, there's still some music being played. So educators are not just out here protesting, they're still, in a way working.
Speaking of music, a lot of these signs have that Hamilton reference. That seems like the pop culture thing of the moment that people are they're attaching themselves to this moment in history.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a moment of democracy. I mean, and it's, a lot of times when we focus on the state capitol, we focus on the routine of votes happening in committees in the House and the Senate, and there's kind of a decorum involved in it. But they call the Capitol the People's House for a reason. I mean, this is the place where people of all different interests and advocacy groups have come up here since the beginning to advocate for their cause. I mean, one of the reasons you have a large plaza like this on the South Steps is for events like this. And so, this is part of democracy. In fact, you talk to a lot of teachers and parents that are here with their kids. You watch them actually imparting those lessons while they're here. I mean, pointing out how the voting process works. I was in the Capitol early, and a lot where you could tell this was maybe the first time in the Capitol, especially with their children. And they had a list of all the lawmakers, and they were looking at where their offices were located, and some were taking a peek inside the House chambers and kind of getting their first look at what that looks like. And so. Yeah, I mean, the Capitol's not just a place for lawmaker votes. I mean, it's a place for the people to gather, and they're doing that today.
We saw some organization over the weekend, DPS, Oklahoma Highway Patrol, said, hey, you're welcome to come out here. Here's how it's going to go down. So it seems like it's pretty structured today of here's where you go, here's where you park, and here's how this is going to happen.
Yeah, so far I would describe it as a fairly smooth process. I got here pretty early, so I wasn't fighting a lot of traffic. And got a good parking space in the press lot. But, at one point, there was a parade of teachers just walking around the Capitol, and I kind of got the sense that was just to put them somewhere, just to do something. And they were all in good spirits and laughing and cheering and yelling. But yeah, so far things seem to be pretty orderly. A lot of law enforcement security is really tight. There's always security when you walk inside the building, but I noticed in the couple trips I've made inside that at the metal detectors they're using even enhanced caution. So it's taking a little bit longer to get in there, but actually not as long as I thought.
Among the things they said was, hey, pare down everything you're going to bring in because there could be lines because of security. If you want to get into the Capitol, bring a sign, don't have a stick. There's a gentleman here with a large 2x4. He'll probably get shut down if he tries to go anywhere with that. And speaking of signs, if you're watching this on TV or the various live streams, and it's a heavy media contingent out here, there are signs everywhere blocking the views. There's not a tripod tall enough to get over these signs. But speaking of media, this is a story that has national attention. Oklahoma and Kentucky, two of the states today where teachers are sharing their voices.
Well, there is a lot of national attention on this for a lot of reasons. One is just, teachers walk out across an entire state. That's going to be a national story. West Virginia had their teacher strike a few weeks ago. And, I followed that closely, and I think the national media, for the most part, did a pretty good job. They may have gotten to the scene a little late than they maybe thought they needed to be, and so I always felt like after West Virginia, the national media was like, hey, we're not going to be late to the next party. And so we saw national outlets here well in advance, but yeah, quite a bit of trucks representing media outlets from across the country. I've seen a few anchors from some national spots. I've gotten emails from some of the national media who are looking for more context and context here on the ground. So, I mean, it's definitely fair to say that a lot of the eyes of the nation are on Oklahoma today.
We'll be all over it here at the Oklahoman. Updated coverage through our various social media channels. Our reporters can be found across Twitter. We'll have Facebook updates, including live hits throughout today as things continue on the south steps of the Oklahoma Capitol. We'll wrap it up for now. I'm Dave Morris alongside Ben Felder. We'll come back live once the speaking gets going. But for right now, we got some Journey pumping in the background, and that'll do it for this update. Again, more coverage throughout the day on newsok.com.